welcome back to another episode of Bible Excerpts, and we are coming very close to wrapping up Second Chronicles, and I'm very excited to start with Ezekiel, and I'm hoping to do some new things in Ezekiel. So pray that will happen, and you'll be able to get even more out of these Bible studies. We're also, I think, going to wrap up Hezekiah's reign and the very small sub-series of Hezekiah, that storyline, because this is his last chapter. We're going to be in Second Chronicles chapter 32. But a brief recap, if you haven't been following, and of course I will put a card up on the screen so you can see the whole sub-series of Hezekiah in Second Chronicles. And so this whole thing really began in chapter 29 when Hezekiah ascended to the throne in Judah. And one of his first acts was to cleanse the temple. To cleanse it, to purify it, kind of to do refurbishing, because they had let it fall into disrepair. Not only did he cleanse the temple and command the priests and the Levites to cleanse themselves, but he restored temple worship. And not only was this worship at Solomon's temple of God, it was true worship to God. And they wanted to do more. He didn't just stop there. He continued his reforms, and he wanted to keep the Passover. And he didn't want to just keep the Passover with his people. No, he sent runners throughout all the land of Israel so that everyone would come and worship at the temple of God and keep the Passover feast. And at that feast, even though people hadn't gone through the ritual cleansing, hadn't done what they were really supposed to do by Levitical law or Mosaic law, Hezekiah made intercession for them. And God heard Hezekiah and healed the people. And the people just had too much fun at this Passover feast. So they kept it another full week, another 7 days. And then the last episode, we talked about the reforms of Hezekiah some more, and how he continued to restore worship and faithfulness to God. So today we're in 2 Chronicles chapter 32, and I think we're going to finish this sub-series off, because we can probably read all of chapter 32. And I didn't get any feedback about if these videos are too long or too short. So let me know in the comments what you think. And don't forget to like and subscribe while you're down there. Thank you. All right, so 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verse 1. After these deeds of faithfulness, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered Judah. He encamped against the fortified cities, thinking to win them over to himself. And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and that his purpose was to make war against Jerusalem, he consulted with his leaders and commanders to stop the water from the springs which were outside the city, and they helped him. Thus many people gathered together who stopped all the springs and the brook that ran through the land, saying, "Why should the kings of Assyria come and find much water?" And he strengthened himself, built up all the wall that was broken, raised it up to the towers, and built another wall outside. Also he repaired the Millo in the city of David, and made weapons and shields in abundance. Then he set military captains over the people, gathered them together to him in the open square of the city, and gave them encouragement, saying, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or dismayed before the king of Assyria, nor before all the multitude that is with him. For there are more with us than with him. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God, to help us and to fight our battles." And the people were strengthened by the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. I do want to stop there. I want to stop a little bit more often and reading through the whole thing and then having to go back and find things that I want to talk about. So the first thing is in verse 1. It says, deeds of faithfulness. After these deeds of faithfulness, Hezekiah had demonstrated that he was being faithful to God. All of the works that we talked about in previous episodes that I mentioned in the recap, all of these were works of faithfulness. of allegiance to God. And Hezekiah had done well. In fact, the last verse of chapter 31 says that he prospered. But now we're seeing a storm coming upon them. That he's about to have his faith tested. His reign has been very easy. He has not had to go through very many, maybe no, difficult trials in his reign. But now he's facing invasion from the king of Assyria. He's facing a threat. And of course, this series is to not only look back at Bible stories and marvel, but it's to draw practical applications to our lives today. So thinking spiritually, we have our lives going well, it's all going good, and then we start to have trials come upon us. And that's just the reality. That's just the reality of life itself, and it's especially the reality of being a Christian, being a faithful Christian, and being devoted to God. And of course, we think about Job. Everything was going well for him. He was living in comfort. He had all the things anyone could ever want. He was a wealthy man, great family, and God wanted Satan to consider him. Consider my servant Job. You're not going to find anyone more righteous on the earth. Look at him. And of course, Satan's rebuttal is, of course he's faithful. Of course he's a good guy. You're giving him breaks. You're playing favorites. You're letting him, you're just helping him out. But take away your hedge of protection. Take away all that stuff. And he's going to revile you to your face. And you know, I don't envy Job. He had it very difficult for a while. But I mentioned several episodes ago that we are supporting characters. I think I mentioned that. It might have been a prayer meeting that I mentioned that. But we are the supporting actors. And our job is to support the main character, which is God and Jesus, which is the supporting cast. And not only that, but we have a role in vindicating God's character. He has vindicated us, and now we can vindicate him. And Job was able to vindicate God. Because that was an attack on God, really, not an attack on Job. Satan was attacking Job to get to God. And that's something really to think about and consider. But we have these moments in our lives, and we wonder, why did God let this happen? Why is God letting this happen? Why is God punishing me? In fact, God, essentially what he's doing is allowing us to stand on our own 2 feet, helping us realize what he is capable of and how we can truly be blessed by obedience that goes beyond death, beyond principalities, beyond powers, beyond anything. It's love that's so deep and so broad. And so, spiritually, Satan, he might be encamped against us, thinking to win us over to himself. And what's our response going to be? Well, Hezekiah's response was to stop the springs of water, to stop supplying Satan, to stop, well, that's how we can act. We can stop supplying Satan. Maybe there are things in our lives that are only going to give him ammunition to fight us. We should stop those things, stop up those springs of water, and not allow him to find anything. The same with Daniel. He did not allow Satan to find anything. He did not allow those evil wise men, the evil cabinet members, to find anything against him, to have an accusation against him. Same with us. And in verse 5, we see him preparing, building up cities, building up strongholds, making shields, swords, weapons in abundance, and preparing captains, organizing the troops, making ready for battle. Despite all of these shows of physical strength that he's mustering, he says this, he gives this speech: "Be strong and courageous, and do not be afraid or dismayed. There are more with us than there are with them. His is an arm of flesh. Ours is the Lord our God to help us to fight our battles." And this is a powerful speech. Even though we see Hezekiah mustering, even though we see Hezekiah getting all the troops together, he still says that God is there to help us and to fight our battles. Remember several episodes ago, I forget which king it was, but it was, you do not have to fight. I will fight for you. That was God speaking to that king. Hezekiah is claiming the same promise, that God can and will fight our battles. That there is a heavenly army, a heavenly host that is more, that's stronger. And we do not have to be afraid, you don't have to be dismayed. And this did help the people of Judah. This did strengthen them. And this is what Prophets and Kings, page 351 says. It says, "Nothing more quickly inspires faith than the exercise of faith. The king of Judah had prepared for the coming storm, and now, confident that the prophecy against the Assyrians would be fulfilled, he stayed his soul upon God." So there is a preparation to be done. We do need to prepare for the coming storm. We need to bolster our defenses, build up our defenses, amass our weapons. But when it comes time, we need to stay our soul upon God. And that's what Hezekiah did. And notice Hezekiah, as we continue reading, he did not attack Sennacherib and the Assyrians. In fact, let's keep reading, because this is important. So after this, in verse 9, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, sent his servants to Jerusalem, but he and all the forces with him had laid siege against Lachish, to Hezekiah, king of Judah, and to all Judah who were in Jerusalem, saying, "Thus says Sennacherib, king of Assyria, in what do you trust that you remain under siege in Jerusalem? Does not Hezekiah persuade you to give yourselves over to die by famine and by thirst, saying, the Lord our God will deliver us from the hand of the king of Assyria? Has not the same Hezekiah taken away his high places and his altars, and commanded Judah and Jerusalem, saying, you shall worship before one altar and burn incense on it? Do you not know what I and my fathers have done to all the peoples of other lands? Were the gods of the nations of those lands in any way able to deliver their lands out of my hand? Who was there among all the gods of those nations that my father utterly destroyed, that could deliver his people from my hand, that your God should be able to deliver you from my hand? Now therefore, do not let Hezekiah deceive you or persuade you like this. Do not believe him. For no God of any nation or kingdom was able to deliver his people from my hand, or the hand of my fathers. How much less will your God deliver you from my hand? Furthermore, his servant spoke against the Lord God and against his servant Hezekiah. He also wrote letters to revile the Lord, God of Israel, and to speak against him, saying, as the gods of the nations of other lands have not delivered their people from my hand, so the God of Hezekiah will not deliver his people from my hand. Then they called out with a loud voice in Hebrew to the people of Jerusalem who were on the wall, to frighten them and trouble them, that they might take the city. And they spoke against the God of Jerusalem, against the gods of the people of the earth, the work of men's hands. So, essentially what we see here is a mass propaganda campaign by Sennacherib to discourage the people, to shame the people. And what's very evident in the messages that he sends, both written and by the word of messengers, I keep noticing the word "my" pops up. My hand, my father, my army. Very boastful, very proud, and very ignorant about the power of God. And the good news is that the people stayed strong. The people were prepared. They weren't only prepared physically, I believe that they were prepared mentally. If we go back and look, before the Passover that Hezekiah had, I believe these people would have caved in. They would have been afraid. How many times were the Israelites afraid, deathly afraid of Jericho, of the Promised Land in general, of the, man, who was it that Gideon fought? Those people. Yeah, excellent Bible knowledge right there. They were deathly afraid. They would run in terror and fear of some of these enemies. But they stood on the wall and they stood strong. And I believe that that Passover that Hezekiah had, the reforms that Hezekiah had made, had helped bolster their spiritual lives with God, had prepared them for this moment. And of course, Sennacherib, he tells them of the things that they can see like short term. In verse 11, Hezekiah gave them over to die by famine, by thirst, by stopping up the springs, by hiding in the cities. And so you see Sennacherib is telling lies about God and about Hezekiah and their intent. And then the rest of the verses, he is talking about what he will and can do and what God cannot do. And furthermore, if we read in verse 18 and 19, they tried to frighten the people, to trouble them, to get them to lose their guard, lose their cool maybe. And we see a very similar campaign played out when Satan attacks people. Think about the first temptation and the first sin. Satan, one, told a lie about God and what God's intent was. And then I believe he kind of tried to discourage Adam and Eve too. Obviously, guilt comes from sin too. And if you look at different temptations that people in the Bible faced, there's often a lie that's posed. Jesus calls the devil the father of lies, or liar and the father of it, or maybe it's murderer. But he calls him a liar, all right? He is a liar. The devil is a liar. We should not believe him and his propaganda that he's trying to propagate to us. And we shouldn't lose heart because we cannot see the whole picture. Because it seems like we have been cut off from God's resources, from God's supplies. We need to continue to have faith that he knows what's best and he is going to help us and save us. Let's continue reading. Verse 20. Now because of this, King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos, prayed and cried out to heaven. Instead of attacking, instead of surrendering, instead of making a rash act, the king and the prophet Isaiah, they pray, they cry out to heaven. And this is the response. Then the Lord sent an angel who cut down every mighty man of valor, leader and captain of the camp of the king of Assyria. So he returned shamefaced to his own land. And when he had gone to the temple of his God, some of his own offspring struck him down with the sword there. Thus the Lord saved Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, and from the hand of all others, and guided them on every side. And many brought gifts to the Lord at Jerusalem, and presents to Hezekiah, king of Judah, so that he was exalted in the sight of all nations thereafter. They didn't act. Hezekiah did not act rashly. He waited. He called upon God. And God did fight the battle. God cut down everyone that Sennacherib would have needed. And he couldn't do anything because God had taken out his abilities. And he returned shamefaced to his own country. And his demise was met in the temple of his God. And he had called Hezekiah's God worthless and unable to save. Kind of ironic. I really like verse 22 that says that God, he guided them on every side. Septuagint reads rest, but I like the word guided too. God leads us and guides us. And continuing in Prophets and Kings, the book that kind of goes along with what's being read in the Bible here, it says that the God of the Hebrews had prevailed over the proud Assyrian. The honor of Jehovah was vindicated in the eyes of the surrounding nations. In Jerusalem, the hearts of the people were filled with holy joy. Their earnest entreaties for deliverance had been mingled with confession of sin and with many tears. In their great need, they had trusted wholly in the power of God to save, and he had not failed them. God's honor was vindicated. Really, the Passover, it was a preparation time for what God was going to do here. It prepared the people, prepared their hearts, and you have to wonder, all the other nations surrounding Israel, they must have been thinking, yeah, this isn't gonna last. Look at them worshiping God. This isn't gonna last. They're gonna fall. But this time they stayed strong, and I believe that the Passover was part of that. It had put in their hearts, in their minds, what they needed to do, how they needed to act. And so not only were they praying, but they were confessing their sins. They were claiming the promises of God. They trusted wholly on God. And God did not fail them. He rewarded their trust. He showed them that he is all-powerful, that he is their God, and that he loves them and will deliver them. All right, now we're going to finish up Hezekiah's reign. I don't think I can drag that out long enough for its own episode. So we're reading in verse 24. In those days, Hezekiah was sick and near death, and he prayed to the Lord, and he spoke to him and gave him a sign. But Hezekiah did not repay according to the favor shown him, for his heart was lifted up. Therefore wrath was looming over him and over Judah and Jerusalem. Then Hezekiah humbled himself for the pride of his heart, and he and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the wrath of the Lord did not come upon them in the days of Hezekiah. A common problem with mere mortals is the narcissistic and grandiose thinking that sometimes plagues our minds. And Hezekiah was not immune to it. And there was wrath and destruction that was looming over him, over his kingdom. But Hezekiah, he humbled himself. That's really an important part of our lives, is humbling ourselves and realizing that God is all-powerful, that God is responsible for every good and precious thing that we have, that in and of ourselves there is no desire to do anything good except the love of God that dwells in us. And that's what going to church is for. It's not to really lift up our ego, to raise us up. It's to raise God up, to acknowledge God, and to humble ourselves, to confess our sins, to realize our need of God and our need to grow closer to Him. But it doesn't last for Hezekiah. In verse 27, it says that he had very great riches and honor, and he made himself treasuries for silver, for gold, for precious stones, for spices, for shields, and for all kinds of desirable items, storehouses for the harvest of grain, wine, and oil, and stalls for all kinds of livestock, and folds for flocks. Moreover, he provided cities for himself, and possessions of flocks and herds in abundance, for God had given him very much property. This same Hezekiah also stopped the water outlet of Upper Gihon and brought the water by tunnel to the west side of the city of David. Hezekiah prospered in all his works. However, regarding the ambassadors of the princes of Babylon, whom they sent to him to inquire about the wonder that was done in the land, God withdrew from him in order to test him, that he might know all that was in his heart. Now the rest of the acts of Hezekiah and his goodness, indeed, they are written in the vision of Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, in the books of the kings of Judah and Israel. So Hezekiah rested with his fathers, and they buried him in the upper tombs of the sons of David. And all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem honored him at his death. Then Manasseh his son reigned in his place. So he had very great riches and very great wealth. And it's in 2 Kings, I believe, that the ambassadors that are mentioned, they came and asked questions of Hezekiah after his sickness, which is not addressed fully in 2 Chronicles, but it gives more context here, that God withdrew from Hezekiah to test him and to know what was in his heart. I think it wasn't just God testing Hezekiah to know what was in his heart, but he wanted Hezekiah to see what was in his own heart. It humbled him too. Hezekiah was a great king, and I think that he died in God's love and in God's law. He died faithfully. And there are times in our lives where we might fall short. We all fall short and commit sin. But God is constantly asking us to advance, constantly calling us to love Him and to keep His commandments, and giving us the ability to do so, and prospering us when we do. We might face storms in our lives, but God is able to calm those storms if we trust Him, if we are prepared, and to leave everything else up to God. And so that's the end of Hezekiah. I hope that you enjoyed the sub-series. I really did. Learning about the life of Hezekiah and how it applies to us it's incredibly valuable. And we need to look at the examples of not only Hezekiah, but other characters in the Bible and see where God wants us to be, how they reflected God's character, and even the ways that they did not reflect God's character, and how we can reflect God's character more fully and become the perfect ideal that He's looking for. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave a like. If you're a new viewer, welcome. Watch this whole series. We're getting ready to go to our second season very soon about Ezekiel, and I'll give more information about that as we move closer. And subscribe, ring the bell thing to get notifications of when these videos are released. I typically release Bible excerpts on Mondays. Hopefully I can start doing it on Thursdays too. And of course, there are the Sabbath School thoughts almost every day. Thank you so much. God bless you, and have a nice day.